All right, good evening, everybody. And on the occasion of International Day of Persons with Disabilities, it's a privilege to welcome you all today to a fireside chat, another meaningful dialogue where we shine a spotlight on how accessibility has taken center stage in shaping inclusive spaces. We're fortunate to have with us two remarkable individuals whose journeys and efforts are redefining what it means to create opportunities for all. And to guide us through today's discussion, I am very pleased to hand over to someone who has been a very strong advocate for the persons with disability community, our CEO and MD, Mr. Ram Praveen Swaminathan. His endorsement of advancing accessibility and inclusion has been pivotal in driving ongoing change within our organization. Over to you, Ram, and thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Supriya. It's just, and thank you all for joining us today. I think Mahatma Gandhi once said that you must try and become the change you want to see in the world. At Mahindra Logistics, we've always believed that I think leadership comes down to choices, and choices are driven by beliefs, which in turn are shaped by our experiences. And so, in our journey to become a more inclusive organization, I think our endeavor, the leadership team, has always been to bring in experiences and enhance dialogue, learning from others who've been on this journey, and kind of finding a way to enrich our own experiences through that. And therefore, today I'm absolutely delighted to have two exceptional human beings. And I've had the pleasure of just having a very short chat with them before we went live. And I think, and I have this great sense of just the energy and the passion they have. And let me just quickly begin by introducing both of them. And I think firstly, we're pleased to be joined today by Aradhana Lal. Aradhana is part of the Lemon Tree Hotels, where she currently leads sustainability and ESG as Senior Vice President, which includes overall responsibility of planet and environment initiatives and people, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Lemon Tree has been a pioneer in this space, and one which I know through my own knowledge and interaction with the leaders has been something which has been kind of an icon in terms of the kind of change they've tried to drive, and in a space which I think is extremely sensitive to service quality. So I think there's much we can learn from her. Aradhana is passionate about fostering inclusive, growth-oriented environments. She has, of course, played a continuing role in Lemon Tree's success. I think she's been there for a bit more than a decade, focused on innovation in HR practices and employee well-being. She is an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad and has over 31 years of industry experience across multiple organizations, the Unilever Group, the Taj Group, and now more recently Lemon Tree. So welcome, Aradhana. It's just a pleasure to have you over.
Thank you.
Today. We're also joined today by Prateek Khandelwal. Prateek is the founder and managing director of Ramp My City. I think Prateek's had a phenomenal journey, one which I personally found inspiring at various times as we've looked at some things around accessibility in the context of our own company. Prateek is, as I said earlier, the founder and CEO of Ramp My City, a startup that focuses on improving accessibility for differently abled individuals. Prateek has a degree in civil engineering, and he founded Ramp My City after suffering an spinal cord injury in 2014, which motivated him to work towards making cities and facilities in general more accessible to people who are differently able. Prior to founding Ramp My City, Prateek worked in various roles in the construction and urban development sectors and gaining extensive experience in project management, design, and execution. I think his background and his personal experiences, I think, have helped mold a unique journey, one which most recently, I think, was recognized by when he was received a national award from the president, from the president of the government of India, for enhancing accessibility in over 600 locations and sites. So Prateek, an absolute delight to have you over with us today, and we're really excited to kind of to hear from both of you. If I may, let me, just for the audience, I think we will run few questions between the three of us, and I think if you have any questions and queries, please feel free to use the chat box and put your questions, and we'll come back to that later in the day. Let me begin first, Prateek, with you, and I think you had obviously a phenomenal personal journey, but a journey which I think is best heard in your own words. So I don't know if you could share a little bit about your own journey and what's been the vision behind Ramp My City.
Firstly, thank you, Ram, Supriya, and everybody at Mahindra Logistics for having me here. My journey goes back to 2014. As a guy in his mid 20s, I was living my life and living it pretty well. I had a successful career. I was traveling all over the world. Had a good social circle, great family. But on May 30th, 2014, I had this fall in an under construction building due to which I had a spinal cord injury and I had a paralysis waist down and wheelchair became a part of my life. For 3 to 4 years, I was fighting the injury, trying to recover, going through various physiotherapists and all. And I did recover in some sense, but I realized by 2018, after 4 years, that recovery is an ongoing process and that wheelchair was going to be a part of my life. As a wheelchair user, when I started to go out more, just wanting to lead my life that I was leading previously, wanting to have a career, wanting to travel, wanting to meet my friends, just wanting to be just another common man in the society. When I started to go out, but this time on a wheelchair, I realized I could not go anywhere because of this huge problem of inaccessibility that India has. And I started right from my home. I stay in a building by a very prestigious builder. The entry to my tower is not accessible. The public transport is not accessible. When you go outside, the banks, the ATMs, the hotels, the restaurants, the metros, the airports, the schools, the hospitals, nothing in here is accessible. And that kind of led me to thinking that what is the government doing about it? The government has brought out certain laws, RPWD Act and Accessible India Campaign and various other measures, but everything was very idealistic in nature. And there was no activist or no NGO or no startup in this space which was actually solving the problem of accessibility in India on ground. And that is where we thought that we have this opportunity where rather than being a part of the problem, we can be a part of the solution and start our own company where we can become the implementation agency ourselves rather than depending on somebody else. And that is where we started Ram My City, where we started doing on-ground interventions in terms of ramps, in terms of parkings, in terms of toilets, in terms of braille, in terms of tactile, in terms of emergency exits. Why depend on anybody else? We will provide the solution. And by providing all these infrastructure interventions in less than 4 years, Ramai City has made more than 600 plus places of public usage disable friendly, impacting more than 3 lakh lives. So that has been the journey of Ramai City in a nutshell, and it has been a very rewarding one.
Phenomenal story, Pratik. I think just I think more than anything else, just the shift in your own mind to take your own personal circumstances and actually multiply the impact you could have on a broader community is actually very inspirational. And I think while many of our stories obviously are driven by personal experiences, I think if I repivot back to Aradhana, and of course what working in a more professional capacity in the service sector. What and I'm going back to your career, which is probably like nearly 3 decades, right? As and days when you and I probably would start our careers when this was not such a big thing, right? So what inspired you to become a champion for PW inclusion in the hospitality sector? How did you envision this approach shaping the industry's future, especially in the kind of the context and the way Lemon Tree's gone about it in the more recent years?
So I want to first say that I have been at Lemon Tree for 21 years, so it's two
Okay.
decades. Yeah,
Well,
I'm one of the founding team members. Um, with respect to sustainability and ESG, of which inclusion is a very big part. This role I have played since 2012, so that means about 12 years now. Prior to that, I have played the role of sales and marketing. So I have been trained to be a sales and marketing person, which I did at Lemon Tree, previously at Hindustan Unilever, and previously at the Taj. So the decision to move into this space came at a very different stage of my career, and it came more as an opportunity or I don't know if challenge is the right word that our chairman and managing director Pathu Keswani put in front of me 12 years ago, saying, "Listen, we have been doing some work in the sustainability space and the inclusion space. I want someone to lead it full time now because nobody was leading it actually at that time, and why don't you do it?" So I was a bit confused. I was like, but I don't have any background in this. I've never learned this. So he looked at me very quizzically, like I had said the stupidest thing on earth. And he said, well, just learn it. What's the big deal? So I was like, right, I'll just go and learn it right now. So the opportunity came my way, and I had already understood the work because I had been selling the brand and I had been marketing the brand for all those years. So there were these messages would come into our content, whether it was on the website, whether it was while we're talking to a client, and a little bit of posting was happening on social media, not too much. So we were all very familiar. It was like saying, if our brand is youthful and fresh and fun, we also know our brand is inclusive and hires people with disability. It was just very much part of the brand essence. So uh, the acceptability of it and the ease of understanding was already present in my mind. So I didn't have any struggle of that nature. Naturally, it took me time to build my knowledge because you can't approach this work just like that. So I want to tell you that I took my own self to university on my own. I created my own program. And for 1 year, I would visit a whole lot of NGOs who work in the disability space. Also, I would visit other NGOs and other partners who work in the space of energy and water and waste and so on, just so that I could understand what is my portfolio, what am I supposed to be trying to achieve. So it was a very interesting piece of work. And in Lemon Tree, the HR team and the learning and development team was already aligned to this inclusion work. So it was easy for me to find the ready partners to move forward. What's important is the reason Lemon Tree has been so successful. I would say there are two big reasons. One is the sheer alignment and thought process of the leader. I'm not talking about the leadership team. That goes without saying. I'm talking about the leader. So Patu, in his mind, this idea of inclusion is very much part of the business model. He's not looking at it as a charity item or a CSR item. It is a full-on HR strategy, and it is central to the business model. Now, when the leader of the organization thinks like that, naturally, in the way the organization runs, when you're looking at metrics, you worry about revenue, average room rate, you worry about occupancy, you worry about your cost and therefore your operating profit. You also worry about how many people with disability have you hired, what is the percentage today, and so on. So it's a metric that is getting checked and measured on a regular basis, which is why it works so well. And the second reason is the team has to put in the work, which is HR, learning and development, myself, operations, and so on. So at Lemon Tree, it's successful for both these reasons. There's a whole lot more to say, but I'll pause.
Thank you so much. And I think you talked briefly about metrics, and I think that being in both, Patu's vision and commitment to this as a part of the business model, as well as helping break some barriers, and then obviously talked about how metrics kind of help you measure it and ensure that you're in some ways on course. So can you talk a little bit about what metrics you actually use to measure success, and probably I'll come back and try and get Pratik's perspective on that as well, right, in terms of how we can actually measure impact and the journey itself.
Yeah. So when we started this work in 2007, the inclusion work, our company was 5 years old at that time. And it was started as an experiment with a few deaf colleagues. And then there were some things we learned as we were experimenting. Like we have to teach Indian Sign Language to the people around them, because how will they communicate with each other? And we have to relook at the standard operating procedure, the way in which we provide service in the coffee shop, or the way in which the room boy is cleaning the room, the various roles that they were performing. We need to relook at the standard operating procedure and see, is there a need to make a small change in it or not? If so, we would do that so that it becomes easier for that deaf colleague to work in that role. So within those 2 years of experimentation, we learned a few things, we made some changes, we tweaked our learning and development, we tweaked our SOP as well. And this is how it became much easier to make it a part of the business model, because we had already understood a whole lot. We'd given ourselves that time. Then we moved forward to increasing numbers and moving into different disabilities. So after speech and hearing impaired came physical handicap or orthopedic handicap or locomotor disability. This could be a person who's a wheelchair user, or it could be a person who has a partial disability. Then we moved very quickly into low vision and to some extent visually impaired, but there were some challenges there. And it was in 2012 and 13, once I had moved into this space, that we entered the intellectual and developmental disability space and neurodiversity. Now, these are disability types that are even more challenging because in the case of intellectual and developmental disability, the IQ is below normal. That means you have to train and teach somebody in a slightly different way. In the case of autism and neurodiversity, the challenge is not the IQ. The challenge is their ability to engage with other people, their ability to handle changes in their flow, changes in their day. They need predictability actually. So even if we are in a hotel company where all processes are very predictable, things do change on a day-to-day basis. So how does it work with someone who's autistic? So what's been interesting in our journey has been this movement through these different disability types. And therefore, when we look at metrics, initially it was just that how's the experiment going? Are they able to perform all the 30 tasks that they have to experiment? How much time are they taking per task? A few simple things like that. Once it became part of the inclusion process and the whole HR strategy, then we started moving towards a target. So we were at 2% or 3% that time, and we said we want to go to 5%. That was a measure to look at. Then we said we want to move across the disabilities. So if any hotel was only hiring deaf and not hiring any other kind of person, we would counsel that hotel and talk to them and make sure that they move forward. So we were monitoring and analyzing the total number of people with disability, the percentage versus the entire staff of the hotel, the different disability types, the level of efficiency of those team members. Uh, After about 3 or 4 years had passed, we also wanted to see if there was any growth taking place in these team members. So we have a concept called SHAs, super high achievers, and high POTS, high potential employees. So we were trying to see that were they making their way into the high pot list? The high pot list happens first. It's a larger number. And some of those who really shine and do better move into the next level, super high achievers. And from there is where the hotel managers and deputy managers are emerging. So I need to say that today we don't have any hotel manager or deputy manager who's a person with disability, sorry. But we do have supervisors and other shift in charges and so on who are people with disability. So we were measuring and we were tracking how their growth was going on. But I think there's a lot of work for us to do on growth in the future. And one of our dreams, and if we can ever do this, I think it'll be maybe the most beautiful story ever, is that can we have a hotel manager who's a person with disability, and it would just be absolutely phenomenal. Uh, the reason these metrics have been so successful, even though they are very simplistic, is that they are part of everyday conversation. So this is what I want to tell Mahindra Logistics. If you ask each other that how many, I don't know your business, so I might sound a little childish when I say this, but suppose you're measuring that how many truckloads of goods have moved through a particular distribution center, or you're measuring did they reach in the desired time or did they fail the timeline, or you're measuring at what cost or what revenue did you make per truck, etc. You will, if you also start measuring that what's your employee count in this distribution center or this location, and what's the count of men and women, and what's the count of people with disability, then you will move in that direction. It'll actually start ramping up, literally, is what will happen, hotel by hotel, location by location. So that's what I wanted to say about measurement.
Well, thank you, Anand. That's and then some of our own experiences, I think, mirror what you said, obviously, to a we're much earlier in the journey or much younger in the journey, if you may. Pratik, I think you obviously had a bit more of an outside perspective as well, helping companies or institutions becoming more accessible for, right, or improve the accessibility. What have you seen in terms of best practices or in the way the companies measure themselves or look at, how to drive this change? Are there some things which stand out in terms of potential, allies or drivers of change?
So when we deal with companies, and especially when it comes to accessibility and inclusion in companies, I think there are three kinds of focus areas that we typically look into. First focus area itself is the awareness within the company. Sometimes the company itself is not aware that how many persons with visible and invisible disabilities are actually working with them. Sometimes we think that only people who have very visible disabilities are actually persons with disabilities, but there are so many examples. If you look within your in your company, I mean, there may be people who may be having joint pain, back pain, arthritis. There may be people, so many people who have low vision. As soon as you take off your glasses, you can't read anything. Even those are people who need some kind of an assistive tool to carry on with their days. And similarly, there are people across the spectrum in a company who need some kind of assistive help, which the company may not be recognizing at directly at the forefront, but what they need to. So first is to make them realize that there is a population within the company, there is a employee group in the company which is in need of assistive tools. Second is telling the company that it is a business case and to hire such people, because as per the World Bank, 15% of every country's population has some kind of disability. So there are people in your workforces already with that. Once the company comes on board with those terms, I think the next thing we do is improving the infrastructural accessibility of the company. By that, what I mean is sometimes we take accessibility as rocket science or as big bang change. We think we have to do major structural change to become accessible. And I think that is the whole phenomena we are trying to change, that just by doing simple common sense thing, you can be much better at accessibility. Like simple things like creating parking or creating accessible entrances, or just like adjusting the height of where your power sockets are, so that if a person with wheelchair wants to charge their laptop, how can they go about it? If they want to drink water, what should be the height of the RO? If they want to eat food with their colleagues, what should be the design of the table? Simple things, simple solutions, and with very incredible impact. And the third thing that we are doing with companies is driving awareness within the employee group. Now imagine a situation where it is late weekend night, and I'm a person with disability, and I have come from some of my friends, and I've come back home late, and it's 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the night, and I am sitting in an Uber Ola, and I am right in front of my home, but the cab driver is acting cranky and not really helping me get the wheelchair out of the boot, and I don't know what to do. And imagine at that situation only, there's this person who works at Mahindra Logistics, and passing by, assesses the situation, looks at me and says, "Hey, I can help you." And there he goes, opens the boot, takes the wheelchair out, unfolds it, helps me transfer, leaves me till the entry of my tower while making a conversation with me, and almost being my friend. Now that is the culture in companies that we want to drive, that everybody, for everybody, and everybody having access to everything. That is, I think, the training and awareness of employees is of prime importance in today's world, and that is the kind of toolkits that we are designing for managers as best practices. That whenever you have somebody on board, not only do you get trained yourself, but you also spread more awareness within the organization.
Thank you, Pratik. I think that's very insightful, very a complementary perspective to some of the things which Aradhana already spoke about. I think one of the consistent things which obviously come out is how do you break barriers, right? I mean, I think Aradhana spoke about this. She's been doing this for 12 years or so now, right? And Pratik, obviously, you've had more life-changing experiences during this. And so we come down to kind of breaking barriers. Aradhana, what do you think? I mean, you've kind of been very close to this now for so many years now. What unique challenges do you think people with disabilities face, in your sector and probably even more broadly in services as a whole, both as employees and even as customers, and of course, how is Lemon Tree specifically trying to overcome them?
Sure. I'm going to answer that question. I want to just add to what Pratik said a few minutes ago. So he's right. If buildings and public places are not accessible for any person with disability to move around, whether it
Mm,
is for work or for a personal reason, becomes very, very challenging. And that feeds into our challenge of hiring people with disability, because we need them to move from their house to work and work to house and so on. The other thing that he mentioned was the sensitization and the awareness levels of a person in an organization like Lemon Tree and like he quoted in that example, Mahindra Logistics, where the understanding of how to work with a disability and the understanding of how to engage with the person who has a disability is so high that customers make choices for your brand. It is incredible, actually. See, we've been doing it for 17 years. So here's a piece of information. We now have about 10,000 employees as a company. These 10,000 employees know English, they know Hindi, and they know Indian Sign Language. So think about that. What does it mean to a customer who might be deaf? If he comes and stays in a Lemon Tree, imagine how easy communication will be for him. Also, if it's a customer on a wheelchair or someone who's got a vision impairment, we understand and we know how to engage with that person, all our staff. So when they come to the cafe or the front desk or they're in the room, imagine the ease with which they can do things. A last point in addition to what Prateek said was that hotels need to be accessible, of course, in the public areas. There must be, and they are designed like that. It's called universal access design. But hotels should also have some rooms that are usable and accessible for a person with disability, including a simple thing like the sockets not being too high or the peephole not being too high, and the whole bathroom being designed in a way that a wheelchair can go inside, etc. So all this work is going on at most hotel companies and definitely at Lemon Tree. So I just wanted to add to Prateek's points. Now, coming back to the question of the kinds of challenges that we see when we are either trying to hire someone with disability or they are coming to our hotel as a guest. So the first challenge really is access and the ability to move around, which I think is what Ramp My City does, is to enhance that. And a lot of this work has to be done by the government because it's public areas, but a lot of it can be done by organizations as well, whether it's a mall owning company or a cinema company or a hotel company or a restaurant company. Each of us in our own space has to make places physically accessible. It should just be a part of design. There should be no question about it. So that's one area. The other area is, especially when it comes to hiring, there is a strange phenomena of mismatch of demand and supply. On the one hand, we say that 1 in every 7 people globally is a person with disability. This is said by the UN actually. The Indian stats don't match this number. They're a very different, much smaller, like 1/5 the number or something. I don't know what the number is. So if we take that universal or global number, if 1 in every 7 is a person with disability, then how come, and they are not being employed, everybody's not getting employed, and there's a huge level of unemployment in people with disability, then how come there is a demand and supply mismatch? It's a real, mystery. But the mystery is easily answered because there are two problems. One is a person with disability will find it much more challenging to go to his or her place of work every day. Whether that person is deaf, using a wheelchair, blind, autistic, it doesn't matter. So it's not possible for a person to take a job at a location that is 20 or 30 kilometers from his or her house. It is also not possible for a person with disability, most disabilities, deaf find it easier, to change city. If they just cannot get up and go to another city, it doesn't work. So the demand for these jobs or these people is, suppose in, let's just take Bangalore. It's in Bangalore, suppose in the Electronic City area, or the other way around. It's in Bangalore in the Alsur Lake area and the MG Road area. But the folks are living in either the Whitefield area or the Electronic City area. How are they going to come every day to this location? It's really, really tough. And same thing between rural and city, and same thing between cities. And the second aspect is if you need that person to have particular skills or education. In the case of Lemon Tree, there are 3 or 4 roles where we are very agnostic about the education. They can be school dropouts also, it doesn't matter, we'll train them. But there are some roles, example, if you want to be a chef, if you want to be part of engineering, if you want to be part of finance, we can't take a school dropout in that case. We need that person to be skilled in that area. So there must be a BCom for finance, there must be an ITI at least for engineering, and there must be food craft at least to be a chef. So to get a person with disability who has been able to do this program is challenging sometimes because the colleges and the universities are not offering it to people with disabilities. So the whole education and skilling side becomes a challenge. So this demand and supply mismatch is the reality, but there are stories behind that story, which is why it becomes difficult. Another very strange challenge is that families are very protective about the person who has disability, especially in two situations: if it's an intellectual challenge or if it's autism, and if it's a girl rather than a guy. So when families are so protective, they don't understand that for this person to be included, the person has to also have certain responsibilities and take them. So they must come to work 6 days a week. They must work 8, 9 hours a day. They must not try to leave 2 hours early. So, that kind of freedom and flexibility is certain families look for. All families are not like that. But certain families, they really make your job of hiring people with disability very tough because they just don't get it that it's a serious business. You're not going for a summer class to learn cooking or something. It's a very serious business you're doing of finding a job and working in a job. So we find this challenge of managing the expectations and the behavior of the family impacts the behavior of that employee as well. From a customer lens, I think the challenges are very fundamental. One is of access, and the other is of getting service in the way that they require it. So, if somebody needs a particular kind of assistance, any hotel or any airline or any airport must be trained. You hear horror stories of things that happen at the airport, and Pratik might have more stories to tell. Things that happen at the airport and things that sometimes happen on board on a flight. And it really gets tough. I'm just touching wood here that it doesn't happen so much at hotels, but it can happen, right? So these are really the broad challenges. There are more, but I think these are the important ones.
Thank you, Aradhana. And I think, yeah, and Pratik, of course, if you moved it if you look at the same challenge more from an entrepreneurial lens, as somebody who's not just, who's come from a very successful professional career, had this life-changing event in some ways, but really converted that into significant entrepreneurial opportunity. What challenges did you face in setting up Ramp My City, and how did you kind of really look at addressing them?
So I'll tell you the business story of Ramp My City. So first, when we it was at Farzi Cafe in 2018-19. Farzi Cafe is in Bangalore, and
Hmm.
I wanted to go there with a friend because they supposedly had very good prawn tempuras. And my friend said definitely go and have them. When I went to have it there, I mean before going, I just called them on phone saying, "Do you have a ramp?" And they said did not have a ramp. And I requested them, their owner, Mr. Zorawar Kalra, on tweet that can you please put a ramp, and he did put a makeshift ramp for me. So when I went there, that is the first time that the idea struck me that, wow, you can build these kind of ramps at so many places. Now, with this idea in mind that you can build these kind of portable add-on ramps at so many places, I thought, why can't we scale it now? So I went to different restaurants, I went to different banks, I went to different people in private and public spaces saying, I am going to provide you a ramp. Why don't you take a ramp from me? And that is where the first roadblock came, and the major one. People were not ready to take it. People said, who comes here? Kaun aata hai? And if somebody comes, they will say, we have staff, 4 people to lift and get them inside. So that was the first major challenge that I saw, that people were not ready to do this kind of expenditure. Even the corporates, and you can talk end to end, the corporates who talk big on DEI journey, even on social media platforms, but when you actually talk about how much budget is allocated to make their building accessible, you will see the real numbers there. And this is not me saying it idealistically, but actually by dealing with so many corporates now in my work life. So the problem was that people were not taking accessibility seriously, or it was more of a charitable cause in their heads. And unlike Lemon Tree, people were not taking it as a business case. The root cause of this problem was that enforcement of law by the government. There's a law by the government, that is RPWD Act, Rights of Person with Disabilities Act, which ensures equal access as per certain harmonized guidelines, which are mandated by every building should follow. But because it is not enforced properly or strongly by the government, we see that the public and the private sector lack the will to have that accessibility measure. So that was the first hurdle that I saw, that people were not ready to buy the solution. So How do we then go about building or manifesting this vision of having thousands of accessible places around us? How do we manifest? Where will the money come from for this? Well, then we found that there is a lot of CSR money in the market, philanthropic money. As per Bain and Company, almost $15 billion every year in India goes for private philanthropy. Most of this money goes out for education, employment, environment, healthcare, rural development, all livelihoods. And we said, why can't we divert some of this money into making public places more accessible? And that is when we started approaching corporates saying, why don't you sponsor some ramps for us? And the corporate market slowly opened for us, where they started diverting their CSR or philanthropic money towards Ramp My City, where we used to get RAM sponsorships for 10, 50, 100, 200 RAMs for a year. And that is how we scaled the ramp business side of it. And also while doing this, as I say it, and it is the good news that the law is now getting more and more stringent, the corporates are getting more and more aware, the builders are getting more and more aware, and the ESG, the SDGs, and all these things, and the certifications like IGBC, all these things are now coming into play, where they have started to take more measures in the private sector also to make their building end-to-end accessible, and not only in terms of a ramp. So that is how we are scaling our business, where 60 to 70% of it usually comes from the corporate sponsorships, and now 30% of it comes directly from where private entities want to make their buildings accessible.
Thank you very much, Pratik. I think obviously we've had a dialogue. I'm not sure if either of you have any questions for me. So if you do, please do feel free to dive into that end as well. I feel like I'm getting the easy end of this the conversation. But I think just I think we're coming on to a little bit more than half an hour, and want to be cognizant of your times. I think one key question I didn't want to leave with both of you, and want to get your perspective on it, is what's the one big call to action which individuals can make in their own space? And I think it'd be wonderful to get your perspective. Both of you have got corporate experience, and I think obviously Aradhana, you talked about how you graduated in some ways into this role, right? And so Pratik, you've seen it right from multiple lenses. What's that one thing which you wish people around you just did more of?
If I think there is one call to action, and that's very simple and straight, I think I would request people, and I would urge them to stop objectifying people with disabilities, stop calling them or treating them as inspirational figures, and whenever you meet them, you call them, you are such an inspiration, more power to you. I mean, I get so many more powers to you that Hulk has started to have inferiority complex almost. Um, and I think I just want to make an appeal to people who are listening, that the next time you meet a person who's having some disability in your public life, rather than calling them inspirational figures, try to normalize the conversation with them. And you can do it in many ways. So instead of calling them an inspirational figure, you can just start them by asking, मौसम का मिजाज पूछें, खाने में क्या पसंद है पूछें, चाय पीते हैं या कॉफी पूछें, उनकी हॉबीज क्या है पूछें, हाल दिल पूछिए, देश का हाल पूछिए, मोदी ट्रंप इंडिया पाकिस्तान चाइना यूएसए की बात पूछिए, ग्लोबल वार्मिंग की बात पूछिए, स्टेट ऑफ इकोनॉमी की बात पूछिए, पॉल्यूशन पॉपुलेशन वाइल्ड लाइफ की बात पूछिए, और हाँ, जाते जाते ये जरूर पूछिए कि अगली बार वो आपसे कब मिलेंगे। बिकॉज माय फ्रेंड्स, यही सारी बातें तो आप किसी आम इंसान से करते हैं। दैट्स व्हाट यू टॉक टू अ कॉमन मैन, एंड हम भी तो वही हैं, एक आम इंसान। बॉडी में डिसेबिलिटी होना, टू हैव अ डिसेबिलिटी इन अ बॉडी इज अ डिफरेंट थिंग, but isn't our biggest disability arises when we don't treat another human being as a human being? And I hope that response will be reflected in the actions of the audience watching this.
Thank you, Pratik. I'm going to have to say this despite like the words are very inspirational. Right. So thank you very much. Radha, your perspective on this?
So I have no hesitation in speaking on forums like this or on a stage, but I have a question. How the hell do you follow that? Like, what do you do now? What do I say after what Pratik has just said? So I want to, therefore, give it a small spin. The same thing he said, but spin it a bit. The normalization. So if you're asking me what can any person do in a company, let's answer that question. Or what can a company do is exactly what Pratik said. That if we can normalize the fact that there are people with disability in our society and therefore they are also there in our companies, and if we can create an environment and create a space where a person with disability is given an equal respect as a person without a disability. A person with disability is given an equal job and an opportunity to do a role, whether it is operations or finance or marketing or engineering or any such role, like a person without disability. If a person with disability is given a chance to grow like a person without disability and is also measured on the same metrics. I get asked this question a lot, that when you look at growth for a person with disability, how is that growth plan? Like, what is the review format and all that? So my answer is simple. The review format and the KPIs, the key results you want to look at, are exactly the same as a person without disability, because the job is the same. So if you're at the front desk, or if you're in housekeeping, or if you're in food and beverage service, you have to make the guest happy and give him the services that role or that function gives. It doesn't matter whether you have a disability or not. So the normalization of including a person with disability in your workspace, in your company, is something that I would say should be our key and top agenda. And certainly by extension in society, which is what Pratik referred to, that when you meet as a human being, then just chat with us about anything and everything. And I must tell you, it's a very important point that he has made. I have observed often when a person meets someone with disability and they're not used to it, they get a little uncomfortable and they think they have to be extra sweet and extra kind and thoda jhuk jhuk ke baat karna hai. It is not correct actually, because the other person really doesn't care about all of that. In fact, if you sit down and say, Bugger, what are you saying? I don't agree with your logic. Suppose you're talking about India-Pakistan match and you tell the guy, Bugger, what are you saying? I don't agree with your logic. He'll feel much happier and much more engaged in that conversation, because you're not worried about his disability. You are just worried about the mudda, which is India-Pakistan, right? So I think that is what normalization is. And I want to say, by extension, this same normalization should be extended to people who are excluded for other reasons. They may not have a disability, but they are excluded because they are from an economically weak background, or they're excluded for social reasons, like maybe a widow or a divorcee, not from the segments that we are used to seeing at work, from different segments actually. Transgenders and the whole LGBTQI space, school dropouts, people who just for whatever reason get excluded and excluded and excluded. If we can extend the same logic of normalization to them, we will really, really have a happy society.
Thank you, Aradhana. I think we are coming up to a time check on this, and therefore I think just as we are wrapping it up, let me just first thank both of you and for all your inputs. I think for the benefit of the audience, if I had to summarize some things at least I'm taking away, and I think there's a bunch of them. I think one, of course, is just to remind. I think you've heard this fact, which I think both our speakers today kind of alluded to, that between 7 to 15% of the people in the world probably have some form of disability. And probably it is now statistically so large that we probably should stop making a big deal out of it. Right? And, it's just about how we adapt to that to make them successful. I think one message which I think both of you talked about was just a need for fixing accessibility. That it is in some ways a first principle problem, right? If people cannot move around and engage with communities easily, whether it is a restaurant like for a cafe or it's a workspace, then it's very difficult for them to actually find a pathway to be productive and to contribute. I think that's really important. I think somewhere we tend to forget that. We tend to kind of just say, okay, what are the other big facilities? Okay, are we kind of checking the box? Or are we actually making every one of them important? I think the sensitization piece was a really good takeaway in both ways. I think I think we talked about sensitization first and just being empathetic about how they are going through it, but also not to let empathy become sympathy, right? Right, and kind of finding this balance, which I think we all as managers have to do. I think that's very important. I think one of the things which I took away, and I probably is a bit more personal for me, just because I have, I'm responsible for the organization here, but I think just the fact that it has to be, that as leaders, our vision for this is very important. Our vision, our ability to imbibe this and integrate this into the culture of the company. And, it is a 24/7 job to drive that change. It's not something you can come in and go out. I think, and I talked about Patu, but and I know Prateek, you've done very similar things in the space you are involved in, and therefore I think it's a clear takeaway. And the one last thing which, and this one has really stuck with you probably more than the others, is how do you find metrics we can talk to, not metrics we can just measure? Because I think a lot of times you're finding metrics we measure and then we put them in a scorecard of some kind, and every month we talk about it once. But how do you actually find metrics which you can talk to from an impact perspective? I think that's something which both of you talked about in different ways, and I think that's something which I know has stuck with me in a very big way. So again, thank you both for coming here. I know for us as a company, I keep saying this, that while there are many drivers for doing this from a business perspective, accessibility to talent, higher retention levels, right? The fact that we are a lot of our employees are at unskilled and semi-skilled work levels, and this becomes a very large but hidden talent pool. I think the most important thing is just to kind of try to create an equal world. Yeah. Right, because the greatest disability in some ways is our inability to see others' abilities, right? And therefore that still remains in my mind. There is never a bad time to do a good thing, and that's really intrinsic to our culture and our ethos at Mahindra Logistics and the Mahindra Group as a whole. And so I think and therefore this remains very central to become. It's a journey. I think being aware and timing and culture of inclusion is as important as the metrics and the numbers. So thank you once again, Aradhana and Prateek. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's kind of afternoon time. We're talking about all our tech challenges, from backgrounds to accessible devices earlier today. So I am truly grateful and thankful, as I think many of my colleagues are today as well, to have you both join us today and spend your time with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think are we off, Supriya?
Are we off?